About this book, J.W. Armstrong has written a remarkable treatise in support of his theory that all diseases except those caused by traumatism or structural defects can be cured by one means. Orthodox practitioners are mainly concerned with identifying diseases and applying treatment which suppresses the symptoms without eradicating the underlying cause of the malady. But, as the naturopath Lewis Kuhn maintained, it is absurd to treat an organ separately, as specialists often do. If an eye is diseased, there is something in the body itself which is causing that disease. The therapy outlined in this book is an entirely drugless system of healing. Moreover, the only ingredient is a substance manufactured in the body, rich in mineral salts, hormones, and other vital substances, namely human urine. It has been argued that it cannot be right to take back into the body something which the body is apparently discarding. Yet this objection ignores the principle of composting as practiced by organic gardeners. Rotting dead leaves, when dug back into the soil, provide valuable mineral salts to nourish new plant life. The same principle holds. The book includes details of successful treatment by urine therapy in cases of the common cold, rheumatism, arthritis, mucus colitis, obesity, prostate trouble, pyorrhea, and many other disorders and diseases by those many people who have derived, and are still deriving benefit from urine therapy. I have repeatedly been asked to write a book, but to the two I have demurred. First, because the necessary leisure has been lacking, and secondly, because I am averse to any form, however, realizing that a thing of self-advertisement, which is put off too long, may never be accomplished at all. I have finally decided to yield to persuasions, and this treatise is largely compiled from notes, case sheets and letters. Other reasons for giving out my experiences to the world will become apparent to the reader in due course. I am fully aware that the publication of a book is attended with certain indirect drawbacks. One is that the writer may be inundated with letters, and another is that, if he is a practitioner, he may be inundated with patients, who may apply to him care of his publishers. As I am not touting for patients, that was a further reason why I wished to delay writing this book. But now that it is going forth to the public, the following must be emphasized. One law having been passed making it now illegal for any but a qualified medical practitioner to declare he can cure certain specific diseases, cancer being on each, should be noted that all case histories relative to such diseases mentioned in this book are those of patients I treated prior to the passing of the law in question. I am not in a position to state whether the law can be stretched so far as to make it illegal for a layman even to say he has cured such disorders in the past, but if so, then, in accordance with the medical dictum, one is forced to assume that, where any such diseases have yielded to other than orthodox treatment, they have perforce been wrongly diagnosed. 2. As the therapy to be outlined in this book is an entirely drugless system of healing, and is a specific for health, and not for any given disease, diagnosis plays no practical part in the treatment. Thus, although the chapters are headed with the names of various disorders, it is merely for the sake of literary expedience, and to show that they have proved amenable to the genera treatment. John W. Armstrong, 1944. Many people believe that 50,000 doctors, vast hospitals, armies of nurses, dentists, chemists, clinics, and about 300,000 mentally deranged are signs of progressive medicine and civilization, but actually they demonstrate complete failure of our medical system, and wrong guidance of the public in nutrition and other ways of living. Thousands of operations carried out weekly with brilliant technique give additional proof that the prior treatments had or not achieved successful cure. Quote, health and not disease is the true inheritance of life. Human creatures fail to realize facts which stare them in the face. We are made of what we eat, so if any organ becomes diseased, it generally means the food was wrong. Major C. Fraser Mackenzie, CIE Health Through Homeopathy, June, July, 1944. Disease becomes a vested interest and consciously or unconsciously, the doctors foster it u-. It is quite a common observation that doctors produce disease. Moreover, the whole system and philosophy of our dealing with disease is mistaken. Dr. W. H. White, MRCS, LRCJ. Hippocrates, the great priest of medicine, advised the physicians to accept the help of the laity in the treatment of disease, but his advice has seldom been followed. Like the kingdom of heaven, the kingdom of health has to be taken by storm. J.W. K0 Chapter I Introduction. Owing to the increasing part played by vested interests in many branches of human endeavor, not least in the very lucrative providing of remedies for disease, intelligent members of the public are growing more and more distrustful of orthodox medical methods. Many people must have asked themselves the following questions. How comes it that for over 50 years the orthodox cancer researchers have been occupying themselves with the cause and cure of malignancy, yet still can suggest nothing better than the knife, radium or X-rays? How comes it that after letters from many doctors had appeared in the British Medical Journal testifying to the highly unsatisfactory results of radium treatment, it is nonetheless still boosted in this country and elsewhere? How comes it that, when effective treatments for cancer have been discovered either by a qualified doctor or by practitioners of unorthodox schools, they have not been recognized by the cancer research ring, which still asks the public to donate large sums towards the discovery of a cure? To these questions, with which I shall deal in my afterword, no satisfactory answers are forthcoming, and we are forced to the conclusion that, although there are many selfless and noble-minded doctors to be found in most countries, in modern medicine itself many things prevail which are much to be deplored. 1. The torture of animals for experimentation, and for the preparation of sarin vaccines. 2. The fostering of fear in the public mind by means of advertising. 3. Commercialism and vested interests which ought to play no part in healing the sick, and 4. A narrow-spirited element of trade unionism which suggests that the patients exist for the doctors instead of vice versa. All these things many doctors themselves have at one time or another commented upon and regretted in forcible terms. And yet, as after a war, nature or the higher powers seem to step in to adjust the balance of things by ensuring that a greater proportion of male children should be born, so when medicine becomes over-tinctured with material considerations, do they seem to inspire some method of healing as a corrective to these tendencies, and as a help to those who are large-minded enough to take advantage of it. Such a method may be precluded by other methods which prepare the way for its acceptance, for one must admit that naturopathy has been instrumental in curing many diseases, where the orthodox system has signally failed. Nevertheless, as we shall see anon, naturopathy as it is usually practiced does not go far enough. For although it can cleanse the body of its toxins, it cannot replace wasted tissues incidental to such grievous ills as consumption, or other diseases of equal gravity. This can only be accomplished by an elaboration of an ancient therapy, the details of which I propose to put forward in this book, and which I have taught myself, and some thousands of others with signal success, although many of them were said to be suffering from incurable diseases. It is true that at one time I had resolved not to write my book until I had had the chance of curing even leprosy, but as I am unlikely to come across a case of this red disease, and less unable to visit those countries where it is prevalent, I have decided to give the details of my experiences to the public without further delay. My contention is, and I do not stand alone in putting it forward, that within man himself is to be found the substance to cure his diseases, whether they be so-called wasting diseases or otherwise, and one proposed to substantiate this contention by case sheets, on the principle that 1 ounce of facts is worth many pounds of theories. If in the course of stating the facts, references to medical failures should be essential, this is unavoidable in the interests of the public, and of truth itself, and such references are made in no spirit of hostility towards doctors. As already implied, there are many unsell and ancient honest physicians to whom I wish to do no injustice. It is erroneous and harmful beliefs and practices which I am constrained to criticize, not personalities. The readers will see for themselves that such criticism cannot arise from any ulterior motives. I have no secret remedy or patent medicine to sell. Indeed, although a layman, am only following the policy required from all reputable members of the medical profession themselves, viz. Make out secret of any discovery which may prove useful in curing mankind, more so, as in many cases theatre men can be carried out at home without any financial outlay whatever. TTL's aspect of the matter has been fully dealt with by Mr. E. S. Barker, whose books are published by John Murphy Y. and by Mr. Cyril Scott in his Doctors, Disease and the 11th and Victory over Cancer, The Cauldron of Disease by R. Roland, also repays study. 12 Chapter 11. The Water of Life. Before relating my own experiences with urine therapy, it is advisable to quote some opinions derived from both ancient and modern sources as to the value of urine as a curative agent. Towards the beginning of last century, a book entitled One Tho, VD Notable Things was published simultaneously in Scotland and Ireland. In this book appeared the Tadlioe quaint citation and universal and excellent remedy for all distempers. Inward and outward drink your own water in the morning 9 days together, and it cures the scurvy, makes the body lightsome and cheerful. It is good against the dropsy and jaundice, drun. As before stated, wash your ears with it warm, and it is good against deafness, noises and most other ailments in the ears. Wash your eyes with your own water, and it cures sore eyes, and clears and strengthens the sight. Wash and rub your hands with it, and it takes away numbness, chaps and sores and makes the joints limber. Wash any green wound with it, and it is an extraordinary good thing. Wash any part that itches, and it takes the itch away. Wash the fundament, and it is good against files and other sores. Here is another quaintly expressed extract from an old book called Salmon's English Physician, published in 1695. Which I will quote in part. That urine is taken from humankind and most four-footed animals, but the former is that which is chiefly used in physic and chemistry. It is the serum or watery part of the blood, which being diverted by the emulgent arteries to the veins is there separated, and by the ferment of the parts, converted into urine. Man's or woman's urine is hot, dry, dissolving, cleansing, discussing, resists putrefaction, used inwardly against obstructions of the liver, spleen, gall, as also against the dropsy, jaundice, stoppage of the tendons in women, the plague and all manner of malign fevers. Outwardly applied it cleanses the skin, and softens it by washing it therewith, especially being warm, or new made. Cleanses, heals and dries up wounds, though made with poisoned weapons. Cures dandruff, scurf, and bathed upon the pulses, cools the heat of fevers, is excellent against trembling, numbness and the palsy, and bathed upon the region of the spleen, urine is the pains hereof. The virtues of the volatile salts of urine: it powerfully absorbs acids, and destroys the very root of most diseases in human bodies. It opens all obstructions of veins, mesentery and womb, purifies the whole mass of blood and humours, cures cachexia, rheumatism and hypochondriac diseases, and is given with admirable success in epilepsies, vertigos, apoplexies, convulsions, lethargies, migraine, palsies, lameness, numbness, loss of the use of limbs, atrophies, vapours, fits of the mother, and most cold and moist diseases of the head, brain, nerves, joints and womb. Leucorrhea should be added to this list. It opens obstructions of the veins and urinary passages, dissolves tartarous coagulations in those parts, breaks, and expels stone and gravel. 14. It is a specific remedy against dysuria, ischuria and all obstructions of urine whatsoever. So much for this panegyric on what some of us have come to term the Kandavai. But one also reads that in the 18th century it was much extolled as a valuable mouthwash by a Parisian dentist. I will now quote some modern opinions as to the value of urine. Writing in Candide, Prof. Jean Rostand repeatedly stresses the biological significance of those substances known as hormones. The gist of his article of some 1.250 words may be condensed as follows. A recent discovery regarding the activity of hormones has completely revolutionized their study. Viz. that certain of them filter through the kidney to pass out in the urine. Multiple hypophysical hormones, the hormones of the adrenal and hormones of the sexual glands, have been found in normal urine. The discovery of hormone urine autophagy has had far-reaching consequences. Urine provides a practically unlimited quantity of basic matter. From the therapeutic point of view, it is possible to envisage the use of these human hormones as apparently capable of exercising great power over the human organism. Thus urine, extolled by many of the ancients, but misunderstood by the semi-moderns, now appears in the light of a wonderful reservoir filter of preeminent value. It contains in a pure, and often undreamt of quantity, products of the most vital nature, bearing out what Mr. Ellis Barker maintained when he wrote that a body distills the most wonderful medicines, and provides the most perfect serums and antibodies. One will now quote some remarks taken from a pamphlet by Dr. T. Wilson Deachman, Ph.C., M.D., who IE 15 as the urine content varies according to the pathological state of the patient. Its use is indicated in all forms of disease except those caused by traumatism, broken limbs, or those that are of a mechanical nature. It saves the physician from the mistake that is mad in selecting the indicated remedy from 3,000 drugs or more. What cannot be cured by the forces of the body, cannot be cured by the forces outside the body. It is not irrelevant here to mention that the late Maurice Wilson, who made a magnificent, if abortive, attempt to climb Mount Everest, ascribed his immunity from ordinary ills, and his astonishing stamina to his many fasts on urine only, plus external friction with urine. 1. Lamas of Tibet and the yogis with whom he associated prior to his attempt, claimed to live to a great age by means of the use of urine. By the same means they can also traverse deserts inaccessible to ordinary mortals. Last century, between the 1860s to 70s, the drinking of one's own urine was a well-known cure for jaundice, and some doctors had the courage to prescribe it. I learned from one of my patients that, when he was a boy, his grandfather had cured him of an attack of jaundice by urging him, on the advice of a doctor, to drink all the urine he passed during the 4 days of his illness. Among gypsies, the health-giving properties of urine have been known for centuries. Cow's urine has been taken in large quantities for the cure of Bright's dice, dropsy and other afflictions. I once met a Dorset farrier who had over a period of 60 years drunk 4 pints of cow's urine a day. He was 80 at the time, straight HT as a yardstick, and he told me that he was never ill. He had, on the advice of a gypsy, begun the treatment age of 20 for throat and chest trouble. Nevertheless, 16 cow's urine as a curative agent is inferior to the patient's own urine, and I have known it to fail in a case of Bright's disease brought on by alcoholism. The wiser of the ancient Greeks used nothing but urine for the treatment of wounds. The Eskimos even to this day adopt the same measures. The question may be asked, if urine therapy has been used by anyone in comparatively recent times, and the answer is in the affirmative. Apart from others, the late W. H. Baxter, J.P., of Leeds and Harrogate, not only took his own urine, but wrote numerous pamphlets on the subject which might have been regarded more seriously had they not been interlarded with somewhat irrelevant moralizings. Mr. Baxter, who lived to a ripe old age, declaring that he had cured himself of a cancerous growth by applying his own urine in the form of compresses, and by drinking his own urine. He further declared that he had cured himself of other complaints by these simple means. Mr. Baxter contended that urine is the finest antiseptic that exists, and, having made this discovery, he formed the daily habit of drinking 3 tumblers full as a prophylactic against disease. He maintained that, if autogenous urine is taken in this way, the more innocuous it becomes. He applied it to his eyes as a strengthening lotion, and used it, after shaving, for his complexion. He also advocated its external use for wounds, swellings, boils, etc. As an aperient he declared it to be unsurpassed. See Doctors, Disease and Health, by Cyril Scott. I can vouch for the truth of this statement, as Mr. Baxter was for a short time one of my patients. But what is not mentioned in the above is that during the treatment he fasted on urine and water only. His fasting, as the reader will see later, is an essential part of the treatment at any rate in serious disease conditions. 17. In some rural districts the use of cow's urine has been advocated by doctors for boils. A case may be quoted of a man who had a number of painful boils under his arm. They were quickly cured by compresses of cow's urine. En passant, I may mention that not so long ago one of the most exclusive and expensive toilet soaps was made from the dehydrated salts and fats of the urine of grass-fed cows, and another from the urine of Russian peasants. My informant was a chemist who knew what he was talking about. Furthermore, some expensive face creams contain hormones derived from human urine. What the eye seeth not. 18 Chapter E. Some objections answered before proceeding. It is advisable to deal with some objections which have been, and may still be, raised. It has been argued that if man were intended to drink his own urine he would have been born with the instinct, but one may as well argue that, because man to do so, has not been born with the instinct to do deep breathing exercises, or adopt other measures which have proved conducive to health, they are therefore invalid or reprehensible. Take, for instance, the yogis of India. By dint of practicing breathing exercises, strange postures, etc., they not only arrive at a perfect state of health, but contrive to extend life far beyond the usual 60 years and 10. At 150 years of age a proficient hatha yogi has not even a grey hair. See Raj Yoga, by Swami Vivekananda. It is true that the science of yoga can only be safely learned at the hands of a competent teacher, but that is another argument against the instinct theory. See Heaven Lies Within Us by Theos Bernard. One notices, by the way, that man does not trouble about his instincts when it is a question of imbibing strong liquors, or smoking hundreds of cigarettes. In short, when it is a matter of doing things which are bad for him, even though the first time he experienced their delights his instinct rebelled. And now to answer another objection. How can it be right to take back into the body something which the body is apparently discarding? And yet if we turn to nature, what do we find? We find that where instead of scientific manures, the dead leaves are put back 19 into the soil, the resultant flowers are the most fragrant, the fruits the sweeter, and the trees the healthier. On the other hand, where the soil is for some reason deprived of those chemical substances produced by the dead leaves, etc., then the trees which grow in that soil are disfigured by excrescences, which I think, quite aptly have been called tree cancers. What we are accustomed to regard as useless dead leaves are the very opposite of useless, and should be dug back into the soil instead of being swept away by the gardener. Let those who challenge this statement taste the aceni produce, grown from soil treated on the principle that all that comes from the soil should be put back into the soil, and they will soon be convinced that the principle is a correct one. The idea that nature is wasteful is erroneous. She only appears wasteful to us because we do not understand her. The rotting dead leaves provide the most valuable mineral salts for the soil, one of the most essential being potash. Even the ashes of burnt dead leaves and burnt wood charcoal are of great value. Therefore why should a principle which applies throughout nature not apply with certain reservations to the human body? This question is the more readily answered if we consider the constituents of urine. Yet before doing so, something should be said about the unreliability of urine analysis as a means of diagnosis. Though urine analysis is still a practice among orthodox doctors, it has been found that the elements in and general condition of urine depend far more on the character of the food and drink taken by the patient than on any fancied or real disease condition. Even the presence of sugar can no longer be regarded as an infallible sign of diabetes. This I have proved to my own satisfaction, by taking for a day nothing but drinks made of chemicals, wheat powders, and nothing in the way of 20 food except a quantity of heavily sweetened ices. On such a diet, after 12 to 14 hours the urine of an otherwise healthy person became charged with sugar and suggested to the doctor that he had diabetes. Similar mistakes have been made with regard to albumin found in the urine as the result of an ill-balanced diet. Some years ago a friend of the writer's connected with a life insurance company had a number of prospects turned down owing to heavy deposits of albumin in their urine. Finally he brought 3 of these men along for by dint of altering their diet, all the eye investigation, supposed to be indications of Bright's disease, nephritis or albuminuria from which they were alleged to be suffering very soon vanished, and at a subsequent examination by the insurance doctor they were told they must have had local inflammations when previously examined. Further comment seems superfluous. Urea N nitrogen, urea creatinine and creatinine, uric acid N, uric acid amino N, ammonia N, sodium, potassium, calcium, magnesium chloride, total sulfate in, organic sulfate 21 682 14 59 36 97.2 12.3 36.99.7 57 212 137 19.5 11.3 314 91 83 inorganic phosphate pH total acidity as CCN/10 acid 127 6.4. This is significant as showing the amount of valuable mineral salts contained in healthy urine, to appreciate which, one needs to have studied the biochemical system of medicine. Even so, as already implied, there are wide variations in urinary composition according to the foods and drinks consumed. For instance, taking 15 or more subjects, we find that, whereas with the average urea N amounts to 682, the maximum amounts to 1829, whilst the minimum is 298. As to the volume of urine passed, it varies greatly according to diet and season of the year. Also, urine passed at night is about 1/4 to 1/2 of that passed during daytime. In view of the above analysis, we may well ask ourselves the question, if the elements which urine reveals are not required by the body, then why do our food chemists and biochemists emphasize their value and declare them to be essential to the body upkeep? Dr. G.S. Cotton, of Temple, Texas, writes me that urine also contains allantoin C4H 6.03, N4. No mention of the valuable hormones to which Prof. Gene Rostand refers is made in the above. 27.8 The idea that urine contains poisonous elements which the body is endeavoring to eliminate is based upon theory only, and is not demonstrated by the facts. As survivors in open boats and rafts often drink their own urine, when the water supply becomes deficient, surely if they were drinking a poisonous fluid they would die or become very ill. Far from this being the case, the practice of drinking urine is pronounced to be harmless. But as the medical department of the Navy pointed out in a letter to an inquirer, the benefit obtained is not 22, as great as would appear at first sight, because in dehydration the output of urine falls to a very low level. I shall comment on this later. Meanwhile, I may remark that, what may be a poison, when separated from its natural environment may not act as a poison, when the medical remaining in its natural environment. Profession may have been impressed when, at the beginning of the century, Charon wrote a whole book on the poisons of urine, but as Prof. Gene Rostand already quoted has since written, the time is not far off when it will be imperative to write of the blessings of urine. Indeed, as we shall see in the course of these pages, the most pregnant of all facts is the outstanding fact that urine, however thick, concentrated, scanty and seemingly poisonous it may appear at the onset of such diseases as genuine Bright's disease, influenza and others, very soon becomes filtered, and greatly increased in volume. This is a fact I have witnessed, when freely imbibed, together with other practitioners of urine therapy, in hundreds of so-termed hopeless cases, and is the best, and most definite answer to the objection with which I am dealing. One other objection which has been mooted, namely by those who are wont to put their trust in the princes of medicine, is as follows: if urine was at one time known to be such a valuable remedy, why has it fallen? And yet those who put this question into disrepute must be unacquainted with the most elementary facts of orthodox medical history, which related of one long series of changes of policy, changes of drugs, of treatments, of fads and fashions and exploded superstitions, of some mortifications, of envies and even of persecutions, of the strangest remedies, have had a vogue for a few years, only to be regarded a few years later as the most disgusting and barbarous superstitions. For instance, the notorious Cardinal Reclus was given HORSE 23 dung in wine, to drink on his deathbed, and not by quacks, but by men we should nowadays call qualified doctors. See Devils, Drugs and Doctors, by H. W. Haggard, M.H.D. Nor am I here giving away state secrets, in alluding to the instability which characterizes the orthodox medical profession. Speaking at the King's College H.M. School on October 1, 1918, Surgeon General Sir Watson Cheyne, MP, urged the students to remember medicine is not an exact science. A good deal of what they were being taught was not true. When they came to deal with life, they knew so little about the living body, that they could not be dogmatic. They could only lay down hypotheses which would hold for a day, and then pass away, and just as the teachings of 70 years ago seemed to them very curious, and not very sound, so it would be exactly the same 40 years hence. The Times, October 2, 1918. The truth of this utterance applies every bit as much today as it did in 1918, perhaps even more so. It is no exaggeration to say that, far from being an exact science, in spite of all scientific tests that patients are subjected to in these days, it still remains such an inexact science that 10 different doctors have been known to give 10 different diagnoses relative to so apparently simple an ailment as persistent headaches. In the American journal Liberty, January 22, 1938, there appeared a significant article by a man in the late 20s who relates his attempts to get rid of this gnawing trouble by consulting no less than 10 doctors in succession, and at the end of his adventures he still retained his headaches. As the story is so significant, and not unfraught with its ironic and humorous side, it may be condensed here. The first doctor told him he had an obstruction in his forte nose, and must see a nose specialist. The second told him there was nothing the matter with his nose, but he must see an oculist. The third told him he had low blood pressure, and must have injections. The fourth told him he had high blood pressure, and must diet himself to lower it. The fifth told him his liver was enlarged, and he must have electrical treatment. The sixth told him his liver was not enlarged, but it secreted insufficient bile. The seventh told him that his pituitary gland was not functioning properly, and he must have glandular injections. The eighth told him he was suffering from intestinal poisoning, and must cut down his eating and smoking. The ninth told him that his was a case of nervous debility, and he must take some pills for the trouble. The 10th told him there was nothing really the matter with him, and that his headaches were just headaches. In citing this article I am not implying that doctors that on the contrary, they are so full of their ignoramuses, addition that they cannot see the wood of truth for the trees of learning. That is one very cogent reason why sooner or later they reject the simple remedy or treatment for the complex, no matter how efficacious that simple remedy has proved to be. A final objection which may be raised against urine intake by the fastidious, although it constitutes no argument against its therapeutical value, is that the taste must be so utterly revolting that only heroes could bring themselves to drink it. This assumption, however, is incorrect. The taste of healthy urine is not nearly as objectionable as, say, Epsom salts. Fresh morning urine is merely somewhat bitter and salty. But as already mentioned, the more frequently it is taken, the more innocuous does it become, and as might be expected, its taste varies from day to day, and even from hour to hour according to the foods which have been eaten. Even the urine which is passed in some serious diseases is not as obnoxious to taste as its appearance may often suggest. 25. And now, having cited testimonials both ancient and modern, as to the therapeutical value of urine, and having also dealt with the aforementioned objections, I will sum up the evidence contained through many years of practice and personal experience on the part of those who are in a position to know the real facts. Urine, on being taken into the body, is filtered. It becomes purer and purer even in the course of one day's living upon it, plus tap water, if required. First, it cleanses, then frees from obstruction and finally rebuilds the vital organs and passages, after they have been wasted by the ravages of disease. In fact, it rebuilds, not only the lungs, pancreas, liver, brain, heart, etc., but also repairs the linings of brain and bowel and other linings, as has been demonstrated in the case of many killing diseases, such as consumption of the intestines, and the worst form of colitis. In fine, it accomplishes what fasting merely on water or fruit juices as some naturopaths advocate can never achieve. The proof of this statement will be found in the case histories adduced in the following pages. 26. Chapter 1 V. Myself cure. Although I should prefer to avoid the first personal pronoun in this book, it is not possible to do so in the circumstances, if I am to carry conviction. 4. As already implied, 1 ounce of experience outweighs a ton of arguments. My first patient was myself. It happened in this wise. During the last war at the age of 34, I presented myself for medical examination under what was called the Derby scheme, and was rejected by 4 examining doctors on the grounds that I was consumptive. Moreover, I was urged to put myself under the care of a physician. Consequently, I consulted a specialist. He, however, treated my condition as not very serious, told me I was more a catarrhal subject than a consumptive one, and advised plenty of fresh air, sunshine and a nourishing diet. I followed his advice, and in 1 year put on 281 bs. in weight. Nevertheless, not being satisfied with my condition, I consulted another specialist, who informed me that both my lungs were affected, and despite what the previous specialist had said, I was consumptive, and must keep up my strength on a diet rich in sugars and starches. Finally, diabetes set in, and I was placed on an entirely new and drastic regime, which consisted of fasting on 6 half-pints a day of cold water sipped during 4 days of every week, whilst on the 5th and 2 following days I was permitted a snack which only served to whet my appetite, not to mention the fact that I was enjoined to chew every morsel of it to such a degree that it only produced a very sore mouth, aching teeth, swollen gums and a swollen tongue. In 27 addition to these discomforts, one was inflicted with insomnia, frayed nerves, and great irritability of temper. The regime was continued for 16 weeks without a break, and although it resulted in the disappearance of my cough and catarrhal conditions, and also of painful sciatica from which I had suffered, nonetheless the cure seemed more unpleasant to me than the disease. The final upshot was that after 2 years of this treatment, I lost faith in doctors and began a series of ventures on my own, although much against their advice. I will not prolong this story by giving all the details. Suffice it to say, there came a moment when, feeling very weak and ill, one recalled the text in Proverbs v which runs, "Drink waters out of thine own cistern," a text which, in its turn, reminded me of the case of a young girl whose father gave her her own urine to drink when she was suffering from diphtheria, with the result that he cured her in 3 days. Other cases also came to mind. Jaundice was one which had been cured by the same means. Nor was this all. I remembered the doctor's answer to my question, when some few years previously one had asked him how he could tell from my urine that my lungs and pancreas were diseased and wasting. I even remembered saying to him in my then innocence, if one am losing vital tissue and sugar through my urine, then why not drink the urine, and replace these elements in that way? To which he had replied, that the organs could not assimilate dead matter. This, however, as I have proved since, was nothing but a theoretical fallacy. And here to digress for a moment, I grant that it is unwise dogmatically to assert that any given text of Scripture denotes this or that, for many people read into the Bible exactly what they themselves wish to find 28 there. Nevertheless, I believed, and still believe, that the text I have quoted, and many others also, bear reference to that vital fluid which is within our own bodies, and believing it, I acted in accordance with that belief, to find in the end that it proved to be my physical salvation. Fortified by my faith in what I thought to be the correct interpretation of the text, I fasted for 45 days on nothing but urine and tap water, and this, despite the doctor's assertion that 11 days without food was the limit to which a human being could go. I also rubbed urine into my body, a very important factor in the cure, with which I shall deal in chapters 5. I finally broke my fast on raw beef, and though it gave me no discomfort beyond ravenous hunger, I nonetheless ate cautiously for a time, and continued to drink my own urine, noticing that its changes in temperature, quantity, taste, etc., depended almost entirely on what I ate or drank, and on the amount of exercise I took. At the end of this treatment I felt, and was an entirely new man. I weighed 140 pounds, was full of them, looked about 11 years younger than I actually was, and had a skin like a young girl's. I was 36 at the time, and am now over 60. Yet by dint of drinking every drop of water that I pass, living on a well-balanced diet, and never eating more food per diem than I consider the body requires, I look and feel much younger than most men of my age, and keep free from those major and minor ailments to which the body is said to be heir. Having now related the essential details of my self-cure, and all that contributed to its continuance, I will merely add that in 1918, being convinced that knowledge must not be selfishly hidden under a bushel, but see chapters 29 should be shared with one's fellows, I began to advise and supervise the fasting of others on the same lines. The rest of this book is therefore largely devoted to results obtained on those suffering from a variety of diseases, including medically diagnosed cases of cancer, Bright's disease, gangrene, and many others which from the orthodox standpoint are labeled incurable. 30 Chapter V. Gangrene, described in simple language as death of a part, is regarded as hopeless of cure by the orthodox physician. Gangrene has set in is a phrase invariably accepted as the last stage which precedes the almost immediate decease of the victim. Where gangrene sets in after a finger, toe or limb has been amputated, it is often fatal, especially in the case of persons past middle age. All the same, I have proved that gangrene can be easily cured. My first acquaintance with the ravages of gangrene was in 1891, when I was a schoolboy of 10. My closest schoolmate had complained of faceache for some days before being taken to a local dentist for the extraction of a tooth far back in the jaw. Unfortunately, some of the jaw came away with the molar, and gangrene set in. Drugs and ointments were applied to reduce, or perhaps better said suppress the swelling, and the boy died 10 days later. It so happened that at the same time as my schoolmate was suffering, I also had a swollen cheek. But the remedy my mother applied, she was a farmer's daughter, by the way, was a very different one from the scientific ones the doctors had applied to my young friend. True, my own swollen cheek was the result of having been stung by a lot of bees, owing to my having disturbed a colony of those interesting little creatures. All the same, it was very painful, till my mother completely cured it by first bathing my face in urine, and then binding it up with pieces of linen wrung out in the same 31 healing fluid. My cheek was normal in a few hours. This treatment was suggested to the parents of my schoolmate with the gangrenous jaw, but merely to be rejected with scorn and expressions of disgust. I have since come to know that urine compresses combined with urine drinking and fasting could have saved my unfortunate friend. About a year later, a young man of our acquaintance died of either gangrene, medical treatment for the condition, or perhaps both. While he was ill, I used to go and read to him, and during one of my visits, the doctor called. He was a very loquacious practitioner, and after a few cheering stock phrases, added that whoever found a cure for this dreadful affliction would merit a crown of gold. Had he read, marked, learned and inwardly digested the old book I have already quoted, on the value of urine for any green wound, he might have known that a cure had already been found years ago. As it was, I little thought then that it would be given to me to prove the truth of that sentence, and much less did the thought occur to me that it would not be a crown of gold I should receive, but metaphorically speaking, a crown of thorns. For although the story is not relevant to this book, I have had to suffer for my doctrines and their demonstration. The first case of gangrene I ever treated was in 1920. The patient was a lady of 53. She had been in the care of a well-known Bradford physician who was an authority on fasting and dietetics. Anemia had developed, the lungs showed signs of grave disturbance, and there was a gangrenous condition in one foot, with a number of skin eruptions of varying dimensions on each leg. There was also a jaundice condition which had turned her complexion to that of an Eurasian, and the whites of her eyes yellow. Her abdomen was dis-32 tended and hard, and her body had become thi and scraggy almost to emaciation. Although the doctor was quite willing that my method should be tried for at least a month, I was loath to advise upon the case, for I felt that no period of less than 60 to 70 days would restore the patient to, however, to my surprise, some encouraging health. Developments occurred fairly quickly, and gave me the first opportunity of observing that gangrene is far from being that hopeless condition which the public and the doctors have been led to believe. By dint of fasting the patient on her own urine and water, and rubbing urine into her body and applying urine compresses, at the end of 10 days the kidneys and bowels were working overtime, and though the eruptions had increased, they were less irritable. The breathing became normal and easy, the patient slept better, and above all, the gangrenous foot began to show signs of healing. By the 18th day of the fast the foot was quite normal, the urine had formed new skin, and there was no trace whatever of the livid abrasions. The foot had healed without even leaving a scar. Yet need we be surprised, once we understand that urine is not dead matter, but so to say, flesh, blood, vital tissues in living solution? As the result of this cure, I was invited to take on another case of gangrene. It was that of a woman in the early 40s. Her right leg was in such a state of putrefaction that her medical advisor had urged amputation of the limb. The trouble had begun nearly 2 years previously with a swelling at the ankle. This had been ascribed to her occupation, which entailed much kneeling on a hard stone floor. She had submitted herself to many F3 I treatments, both orthodox and unorthodox, but her afflictions merely increased. She suffered from severe constipation, piles, eczema, anemia, insomnia, tic nerveux, general depression, sore mouth and tongue, face ache, eruptions at each corner of the lips, and above all, more cavities had occurred in the gangrenous leg. In spite of her tribulations, however, she was a woman of great spirit, and I had no difficulty in persuading her to fast on all the urine she passed, and up to 6 pints a day of cold water, which she always sipped. During the first 5 days of the penance the eruptions began to disappear, and the skin in every part of her body, began to look healthier in every respect. The face ache vanished by the second day. On the third night she slept soundly after weeks of insomnia, and by the end of the first week, the bowels and kidneys were working overtime and the piles were cured. In a fortnight there was no sign of the gangrene, and new skin had grown in place of the cavities. The diseased leg, which previously had become twice the size of the other one, was now completely normal, not even a scar remaining anywhere to remind her of what she had suffered. Subsequently put my recovered patient on an exclusive diet of grapes, bananas and raw tomatoes for a week in small quantities. Added fresh unpasteurized milk for the second week, and in the third week finally got her back on a normal diet. According to my experience, gangrene is often much quicker in response than many other major or killing diseases, a matter which may be seen from a few brief case sheets which I now will add. I should mention that nearly all these cases were treated after the physicians had urged amputation. Mrs. E. gangrenous feet and toes following upon paralysis after vaccines had been administered, 48 days 34 fast. Urine healed feet and toes in the first 20 days. Mr. D. diabetic gangrene of left forearm. Fasted 48 days for the diabetes. Arm completely normal after 18 days. No scar. Mr. J.W.B., 60 years old. Gangrene of first and second joints of thumb, caused by a hammer blow in mason work. Treated for 18 weeks as an outpatient. Treats GI bone removed up to first joint. Discolour fasted according to my diet, spread towards wrist. Method: applied urine compresses to whole hand, wrist and arm. Cured in 1 week. Gangrene Miss CA age 10 in 1980. Anemia of both legs following suppressive treatment for psoriasis. Large areas of skinless and livid flesh in both calves. Fasted 18 days. Cure complete. No more anemia, no groom or psoriasis, no scars from gangrenous legs. Leeches during fast. Is now a member of the ATS and HM forces. Height: above the average. Mrs. B. gangrenous finger. Also severe conjunctivitis following a year's use of atropine. Fasted 12 days for gangrene, then a week later undertook a second fast for the conjunctivitis which cleared up the 23rd day. Age 38 in 1927. Still looks much the same age. Mr. J.I. age 54 at the time. Thumb cut by fish bone. Gangrene ensued. Doctor attended him the same day. Surgeon's decision to amputate rejected. Fasted 14 days. Body rumped with urine. Finger poultice in very strong old urine. Improvement after 3 days of treatment. Cure complete after 12 days. Tubercle again. Mr. N age about 55 at the time. Green of both legs. Surgeons wanted to amputate the limbs. His wife refused. Condition of patient very emaciated. Great depression after much drugging. 35 fasted 42 days according to my method. As well as any man, and enjoys the exercise. Now walks Mrs. L age 48 at the time. Gangrene of both legs and feet, after spilling a large vessel of boiling fat over them. Treated with plasters during 3 weeks by the result disastrous. Fasted 28 days, with physicians. The usual treatment I advocate. Marked improvement after 10 days. Return to normal health after a fortnight. Many other cases could be cited, but as I do not wish to swell the bulk of this book with an unnecessary number of case sheets, when a few should be sufficient to convince any, but the most prejudiced, I will forbear. I think I may say that what I have here put forward shall explode the dogma that gangrene is incurable. We will now provide evidence which should explode another medical dogma, namely the incurability of cancer. 36 Chapter VI. Growths and Cancer. In 1912 the late Dr. F. Ford Ross, of London, a fully qualified physician, wrote a book entitled Cancer, Its Genesis and Treatment. He had during 25 years of practice come to the conclusion that malignancy and other growths were due to a diet deficient in natural salts, especially in potash. By putting his patients on a more balanced diet such as I advocate, and administering potash salts in an assimilable SCT, he cured a large number of cases of that red dice. And yet after his death, not one of his colleagues or one single hospital could be induced to take up the treatment. So firmly had the dogma taken hold of the medical profession, that cancer must be treated exclusively by the knife or radium. His book is now out of print. But another book by a surgeon, Mr. C. P. Childe, advocating speedy interference with the knife the moment a lump looks at all suspicious, is still in print, or was so until quite recently. See Doctors, Disease and Health, also Victory over Cancer and Health, Diet and Common Sense, by Cyril Scott. I am not prepared to pronounce on the merits or demerits of Dr. Forbes Ross's method, for I have lot required to try it. But the treatment of his book shows how little the spirit of democracy prevails in the medical profession, and should give intelligent members of the public an inkling as to why cancer is still said to be an incurable disease. That the dictum is no longer true. If it ever was strictly true, it would have been more veracious to say that many patients suffering from 37 cancer have proved to be incurable. But as I have elsewhere implied, so have many patients suffering from influenza. As for surgical treatment of cancerous growth, the late Dr. Bagliati, of Bradford, admitted to me that in the earlier part of his career, before I knew him, he had performed no fewer than 500 major operations for growths, and that it was the uniform lack of success with the knife that had caused him to search for other means of more effectively treating cancer, though unfortunately in vain. My first case of medically diagnosed cancer was that of a nurse in the late 60s. She had nursed over 50 cases of malignancy in the course of her professional activities, and it says little for the policy of extirpating cancerous growths, that long before she herself developed one, she had vowed that never would she submit to the knife. She was one of many of those in a position to know from the sufferings she had witnessed that, however painful a growth may be before an operation, the pain is mild in comparison to what is experienced after it when the cancer occurs. When I first saw her, she had had the growth for some months, and it had already extended from both breasts right over both shoulders. It gave her little trouble beyond occasional twinges. She had not consulted a doctor about it, but one day, being laid up with influenza, she was obliged to send for a medical man, who, while examining her, discovered the condition of her breast, lamented the fact that it was already too late to operate, and gave her 10 days more to live. The case then came into my hands. Ex-Dr. Bagliati was well known in the medical profession, and his name occurs in many medical books, published both in this country and in USA. A short fast on 38 at the patient's own urine, plus water, was undertaken. Lasted 10 days. Then a light diet was prescribed on the 1 meal a day plan, along with the free internal use of the urine past. No effect on the growth was observed, but the general health and spirits of the patient improved in an astonishing manner. Subsequently the she-retired growth itself gave her no further trouble. To a seaside place to live with a relative who scoffed at my theories, and though doctors had failed to cure her of asthma, worshipped at the shrine of medical ortho. My erstwhile patient died 6 years later, 2 hours after a physician had given her some innocent I had only seen her once looking pellets for a cold. After 1918-19. This case, from my point of view, was, of course, unsatisfactory, but it serves in some measure to show what many unorthodox physicians have maintained, viz., that if growths are not interfered with by the knife, they do not necessarily kill the patient, and even may cause no trouble. A case is cited in one of the medical books, relative to an old lady who lived to 96, and had had a cancerous growth of the breast since she was 40. Various doctors she had called in for minor ailments had wished to excise it, but she had always refused on the grounds that it gave her no pain or inconvenience. Moreover, she did not believe in the knife. Since my first cancer case, I have treated, in various stages of the disease, a large number of further cases diagnosed as cancerous, and even after some of them had been treated either medically or surgically. In consequence, I have been enabled to collect much interesting data on the subject, most of which conflicts with allopathic theories and popular assumptions. Seeing, however, the dogma obtains that genuine cancer is IN39 curable, and seeing that a law has been passed prohibiting any layman even to hint that he can cure, or presumably has cured malignancy, we must assume that all those cases hereafter mentioned which were alleged by the profession to be cancerous had been wrongly diagnosed. First, I may briefly mention en masse the cases of 5 women I will classify as AG, because all were unprejudiced by any kind of previous treatment, and every one of them was of recent development. Their cases, at least, suggest the wisdom of prompt and correct measures. I should stress, however, at the outset, that not one of these patients had been labeled cancer cases. Nevertheless, to be on the safe side, I fasted every one of them away, in addition to applying urine compresses, with complete success. For in addition to the disappearance of the growths, the treatment resulted in a state of general health far in excess of that experienced prior to the fasts. In fact, their growths disappeared so completely that they were all convinced that they could not have been malignant, especially as I make a point of never employing such terms as cancer, malignancy or even tumor during my consultations. Besides, it must be freely admitted that every lump or nodule that forms on the human body is not a malignant growth, although only a surgeon is credited with the ability or the authority to label it either malignant or otherwise. The ruling unfortunately results in many comparatively harmless lumps being labeled as malignant, when such may not be the fact, or it may result in an operation being advised in case they should become malignant. Thus, hundreds of trifling lumps have been treated surgically as a major affliction, and cancer has eventually developed, because as yet, neither doctors nor laymen realize that the surest way to invite malignancy is the mutilation of the female breast, or other 40 parts of the human body. I will now give the case history of Mrs. R. 1923. She was in the early 40s at the time. Condition anemic. Under average height, below normal weight, lump about the size of a hen's egg in one of her breasts. Diagnosed as cancer by the late Dr. Bagliati, and immediate operation urged, but firmly refused. Fasted on urine, and drank 22 pints of plain cold tap water daily. Her husband rubbed her from head to foot with his own urine for 2 hours a day, and packs wrung out in urine were placed over both breasts day and night. Cure in 10 days. Returned to Dr. Bagliati on 12th day after last visit to him, and he could find no trace of anemia had vanished, also abnormality in the breast, and the patient had been restored to perfect health. Here is another case, 1925. Middle-aged woman. Growth of some proportions situated near the armpit. 2 surgeons advised operation, but made a concession to her daughter's suggestion that the patient might rest and take very light nourishment before facing the ordeal. The operation was accordingly arranged to take place in the hospital a week hence. However, as the patient's daughter had derived much benefit herself from urine fasting, she prevailed on her mother to try the treatment in the interim. In 5 days not a trace of the growth was left. I may add that 2 days after the patient should have presented herself at the hospital for the operation, the family doctor called in. He was indignant at having his advice and arrangements flouted in this independent manner, but when having thoroughly examined the patient he found her condition, for instance, San Francisco is a surgically ridden city, it has few physicians but hundreds of surgeons. Therefore we are not astonished when we read that the mortality from cancer in San Francisco exceeds that of any other American city. See Victory Over Cancer by Cyril Scott. 41. Entirely normal, there was nothing more to be said. Subsequently he called in his colleagues, who, to express it mildly, were extremely astonished, and being human, were not altogether pleased. I merely add this part of the story to show that the patient had been properly examined after her recovery. She is at the time of writing many years older, and quite well. A case may now be cited relative to a youngish woman who had developed a growth in her breast. Cite it, because the trouble disappeared in the shortest period I had yet witnessed for what might have been a malignant tumor, or merely a swollen milk gland. I think, nonetheless, that had the patient put herself in the hands of physicians, they would have advised an operation just as they have done in hundreds of similar cases. On seeing her, I at once advocated a fast on her own urine, plus tap water, and urine compresses, in short, the usual procedure I advise. At the end of 4 days the growth had entirely disappeared. And now I will mention the case of a lady who came to me in 1927. It is instructive as showing once again that operations merely deal with effects, and do not remove the cause of the disease from the body. The lady in question was 45, over-stout, and had a growth of some size in her left breast, the right one having been removed 2 years previously for a similar growth. She fasted and was treated according to my method for 19 days, and then reported that the growth had entirely vanished. As she was still too fleshy, I advised her to continue the fast. On the 28th day, I examined her, to find no trace of the lump, and to see a woman looking much younger and far less matronly in figure. The following case shows that one and the same methods may result in curing complaints which have no apparent connection with each other. A young lady came 42 to me with a swollen right breast, near the center of which there also was a nasty, suspicious-looking lump. 2 large ulcers under the armpit. She had been invited by the family doctor to enter the hospital for observation, but declined, seeing that her mother had accepted a similar invitation, had been operated upon and soups moreover she herself, having suffered quietly buried from chronic peritonitis, had had her appendix excised, but without curing the peritonitis. She started by fasting 4 days on my system, but had to break the fast to satisfy her insistent relatives. Nevertheless, after 3 days she resumed the fast, and the second time fasted for 19 days. Already after the 10th day there was a marked improvement, and at the end of the 19 days no trace was left of the lump on her breast, or the ulcers in her armpit. There was not even a scar. But the peritonitis had not cleared up, perhaps because of scarred tissue resulting from the operation on appendix, and so a little later she fasted for 35 days. This had the desired effect. These case sheets should serve to show that nature is a far more efficient healer than are so-termed scientific methods which involve mutilation. If people who observed suspicious lumps on their bodies would only resort to these natural methods I have outlined, and resort to them at once, nature would not fail them. But those who wait till the 11th hour may have to pay the penalty for their procrastination. All the same, I think the dogma anent the fatality of cancer will die hard, because as soon as a case is cured by whatever methods, the tendency is to assert then it couldn't have been cancer. Doctors who resort to this phrase forget that it is a poor reflection on the diagnostic powers of the orthodox physician or surgeon. Moreover, what are we to make of the following admission by the authors of The Breast, in which book Doctors Deara and 43 McFarland wrote, "I have operated on some 1,000 cases of cancer, and they all returned but 6, and they and again they acknowledged were not cancer." Poor results obtained by surgery in any sort of cancer. Dr. G. E. Ward are well known to the profession. Howard Kelly Hospital, Baltimore, italics mine. Yet if these poor results are so well known, then why does the profession continue to advocate the knife, and ignore those who obtain good results without surgery, as did Dr. Forbes Ross and others since his death? Mention may be made here of Dr. W. F. Koch, of Detroit, who, over a period of 20 years, has cured hundreds of cases of cancer, both external and internal, by a subtle chemical formula. Yet far from being recognized by the orthodox cancer ring in USA, he has been scoffed at and even persecuted. Why should this be so? I leave the intelligent reader to draw his own conclusions, and will proceed to cite one or two cases where the doctors, although advocating the knife, held out very poor prospects of recovery, if indeed any at all. These cases include growths in other sites of the body, as hitherto I have only mentioned breast cases. The reader now being familiar with the treatment, I will merely give the barest details. Young man, 28, in 1920. Given 3 days to live. Condition variously diagnosed as either cancer of the gullet or venereal disease. Complete cure. Patient still alive. Lady of 62. Diagnosed cancer of the bowel. Colotomy advised by the profession, but refused. Was under 6 stone and rapidly wasting away. Cured in 3 weeks, at the date of writing is 84. Lady of 42. Diagnosed cancer of breast. Excision advised, to be followed by strict regime, but only 44 mope of a cure offered by the profession. Patient refused operation. Complete cure by the fasting urine method. Is still alive, and well after 21 years. Lady of 40. In 1935 developed the type of growth sometimes called rope cancer. Surgeons pressed for immediate excision, but offered no hope of a permanent cure, saying that return and spread of growth practically inevitable. Cured by the urine fast, etc., in 23 days. Is not only still well, but looks young and beautiful. It may be of interest to the reader, if I cite what the late Dr. Bagliati, that frank, enlightened and broad-minded physician said relative to the treatment of diagnosed cancer and growths by the methods I have outlined. 1. Have examined women with what would in orthodox care have resulted in the removal of one or both breasts. These happy mortals have declined my advice, gone under urine therapy and returned to my consulting rooms without even a scar, to suggest the healing of incurable malignancy. Many of these females have found the lump or lumps to disappear within a fortnight, some in as few as 4 days, all of which suggests that Mr. Armstrong is probably correct in his suggestion that most lumps are not malignant until after surgical and drug interference, and that in the incipient stages, the so-called king of terrors is a very ordinary affair when tackled promptly, in the right way, the way of breaking down boils, ulcers, tumors and cancers into the bloodstream. If, however, any layman claimed and produced 1,000 cured cases on one platform, I doubt if it would impress my profession. Even claims for the improvement of cancer victims are either openly 45 ridiculed or ignored. It is a sad reflection that my profession thrives on disease and the inhuman propaganda of official scaremongering, and the promise of tomorrow, some other day, or never, for the diseases my profession and others have so long exploited. Some prevailing theories as to cancer causation, etc. To relieve the monotony of an uninterrupted recital of case histories in this book, we may give a few moments' attention to various theories as to the causes of cancer, in order to see if they have any bearing on my thesis. Because cancer occurs less frequently among vegetarians, some enthusiastic non-meat eaters declare that the consumption of meat is the prime cause of malignancy. But if this were true, then all persons except vegetarians, unless they died before the age when cancer is usually said to develop, would, without exception, succumb to its ravages. Moreover, some non-meat eaters have and do die of cancer. Well, at any rate, rejoin the vegetarians, meatiati. Ig favours disease in the human body, and as Sir Arbuthnot Lane maintained, cancer cannot develop in a healthy organism. If a man who has been for a long time a vegetarian suddenly starts to the case, may be quoted eat meat, disturbances ensue. Of a vegetarian who averred that there must be some animal fat in a certain brand of rather unusual tasting biscuits, because whenever he had consumed one, he noticed that there followed a slight attack of fever. Maybe, but as against that, I could quote the case of a young man who, having over a long period lived on a diet which included meat, but excluded pastries and chocolates, developed boils and a skin eruption, as soon as he ate those aliments. From this I might agree, if so minded, that as pastries and chocolates produced these disturbances and favored disease, they were the cause 46 of cancer, just as at one time some people believed that tomatoes were its cause. The truth is that wishful thinking has played as much part in the question.